So why do I think Death Must Die is the new king of survivor likes? Well, if you haven't heard of Death Must Die and this is your, first introduction to the game, it's basically very similar to games like Vampire Survivors. It's in the same genre, right? But there's a lot of things that are done very differently to the traditional Vampire Survivors or games like that in the genre. And I'll just talk a little bit about why I think this game, out of all of the games in this genre, this game has the most potential out of all of them. So I'll just go through some of the points. So the first one, and you'll see by the gameplay on screen, that it's very similar to Hades, right? And it's basically, if you took Hades and put it in a survivor likes or a horde survivor genre, this is what you would get. And I think that was just a brilliant idea. I mean, yeah, it's technically, copying and very, very similar to the original product being Hades. But regardless of that, they've made a phenomenal style of game with the aid of Hades being created. And I mean, as you'll see now, gods pop up, and there's text, even the way some of the animations look, and the way the progression kind of works, the rarity to each of the boons you get from the gods, and there's levels to them and all that sort of stuff. It's very akin to Hades, right? But that's not a bad thing, because in my opinion, Hades is one of the best games of all time, easily, and that has phenomenal gameplay and artistic vision and whatnot. So having a game be so similar to it, even though it's in a different genre, it to me isn't a bad thing, because Hades was so good. So I guess outside of just, vague similarities to Hades, what else makes this better than Vampire Survivors? So I covered this a little bit in my Halls of Torment video, because they do borrow a lot of things, not just from Hades, not just from Vampire Survivors, not just from those games, but also from Halls of Torment as well. And I'm sure Halls of Torment isn't the only one that has this feature, but having more interesting bosses in a Horde Survivor, I feel, is just so refreshing compared to someone who has only been exposed to Vampire Survivors. Obviously, because it was so popular, a lot of people have been opened up to this genre because of that game. And to be honest, you're kind of missing out if you only play Vampire Survivors, because to me, the bosses in this game, and you'll be seeing it on screen, is that they're just way more engaging. They actually have move sets. They actually have stages to them. Some of them have develop throughout the fight. They change, right? And to me, that's just way more engaging and interesting than in Vampire Survivors' case. It's a lot of you kind of run into a meat shield, really. They just tank damage, and if they walk up to you, they'll just slowly tick away your health, or fast, because they're the boss, right? And maybe there's some environment changes where, I believe it's the mantis in the first stage in Vampire Survivors, flowers, you're surrounded by flowers. And there's similar, again, you'll see it on screen, but there's similar things like that where you'll be surrounded by, this time it's a square or rectangle instead of a circle of flowers. But I just feel that they do more than just environmental changes. They don't just change the environment and just have an enemy the same as any grunt just walk to you. They actually have moves. They'll dash to you, they'll slash at you, they'll summon things, they'll throw projectiles at you and whatnot. And all of that just makes for a much more engaging experience. It's just way better than what, in my opinion, objectively, than what Vampire Survivors tries to do. And it doesn't need to be as advanced as what's here, but I just prefer, you know, the moveset. The bosses having movesets, basically. That's what it comes down to, really. And the tools to actually, you know, work around that and make a build to maybe be a specific boss and whatnot. So the next thing that's great about I'd say a new kind of way of thinking about making the player move around the map. So with Vampire Survivors, just as an example, though the way they motivate you or encourage you to move around the map would be to, you have a map, right? So you can, or the arrows as well. So that's they kind of promote moving by, oh, there's a chest over here, or there's a small power up, right? Or maybe you can unlock a character in some cases if you haven't done it already on the specific map or stage. And that's all good and well, but to me, once you've kind of done that, so say you have got that character and that's like a one-time thing, where once you've done it, you've got the character, so it's done. And then once you've got the 1 or 2 power-ups on the map, it's kind of there's kind of no need to move anymore. You can just go in a circle and farm the enemies for XP, right? But here in Death Must Die case, they actually promote and encourage moving around the map, and by giving you a mini map, you know, similar to Vampire Survivors. You don't have a full map, but you have a mini map, and a lot of POIs highlighted in a yellow circle. So that will be anything from, you know, you have invulnerability for 30 seconds, or you do more damage, but it gets way more interesting than that. And when it does so, sometimes you'll see a wizard, or you'll run into a Viking or a barbarian, sorry, or you'll run into a bookshelf, and you can pick between 3 options, buffs and nerfs, and or just buffs, and then you'll free a fairy and she'll give you more luck, you know. And there's way more interesting ones that I'm just slipping my mind right now, but and as of playing, I've put about 12 hours into the game, if not more, and I've not seen all the instances of POIs that you can run into, because there's so many. And that, to me, that's a much more just interesting than having the much more limited reasons to explore the map in Vampire Survivors. And just to compare it to Hordes of Torment as well, the way they kind of promote moving is by, a similar thing to Vampire Survivors, right? There's something at the bottom of the map, and there's an arrow, go to this and you'll get a power up, right? And that'll happen to maybe 3 times. And then there's also the well, but you spawn at the well. And the only reason you would move again after getting those power ups is to basically, after the boss fight or before, is to deposit an item in the well. But sometimes that can get annoying, and I covered that in my Hall of Torment video, why that gets annoying, because I'll just explain it briefly here, is once you've killed the boss, and if you killed that boss miles away from the well, which is quite plausible because they try and get you to run so far to get a power up, there's no way of teleporting there. You have to run all the way from where you killed the boss all the way to the well. So, and then you have to run all the way back. So yeah, it's not great. So another key gameplay mechanic, which I almost forgot to mention just because of how, I guess, natural it feels in this again series of games, right? In this genre, it just feels so natural to have this mechanic, but I'll get into it, right? So that's just the ability to dash, which probably sounds crazy if you haven't played, other Vampire Survivors, all those games that don't have it, right? And Obviously Hades has it again, so it makes sense that this game has it. But the reason it feels so natural is because the enemies actually, propose some sort of threat. They dash at you, and there are times where you just have to dash. You have a requirement to get out of the fucking way of whatever the hell they're trying to do to you, right? Especially in boss fights. But even in normal, when you're killing a bunch of grunts, you still need to dodge out the way. You still need to move, and it's more, you'll need, obviously it varies character to character. Some characters will need to avoid more, evade more, and whatnot. But I just love this mechanic. Again, it just keeps the engagement high when you have to click a button to avoid taking a lot of damage. I think that it just makes a lot of sense. Now, there are ways to get more dash charges and less dash charges and dash range and dash recharge speed and all that. So it just adds another layer of variability in terms of your build. Do you need a good enough dash? If you're a long range character, you'd probably want to stay as far away, so maybe you have a long range dash. If you want to keep in close because you have a short range weapon, then maybe you don't want a super long dash, stuff like that. And it feels so natural. It felt natural in Hades. Again, it's a different genre, but I feel like in this genre, it just fits so well to have that added movement choice rather than just walk around. In Vampire Survivors, obviously, you just walk around, and eventually, the boss will either be faster than you, or they'll never catch up because they're not faster than you. So, again, I just think it's way better. I really do. So, the next thing I wanted to talk about would be the hub area. Now, where I am right now, there is a little bit of the outside, but it's fairly, incomplete. There's not too much to look at, so I'll just skip past that. So this is the actual hub area, right? And a key difference is that compared to Vampire Survivors is that Vampire Survivors doesn't have a hub area, right? You just have a menu, you select the stage, select the character, and you're basically in a game, right? So I think having this hub area is just more engaging, more interesting. It allows you to actually walk around and engage with things, and it frequently changes, which I'll get to in a second. Why, what are some of the changes and yada yada, right? So just to start from the top, I guess you have this, which is basically a measure of how to unlock certain achievements and the sort of signs that come with it, which are basically special perks that each character can have, right? But I'll get into that later when I talk about characters. Then you have library, so you can actually find a lot of books, a lot of that have words, and you can just deposit them here instead of keeping them in your inventory or whatever, right? But that's nothing too crazy, is what it is. But then obviously you can talk to characters as well, which is something Vampire Survivors, you obviously cannot converse between two characters. And again, this is very similar to Hades, right? I mean, it's just pretty much the same. I mean, there's no voice acting, but you'd expect that from an indie game, right? And believe it or not, Hades is not an indie game because they have Supergiant Games behind it, which actually do have quite a lot of funding. So, and then I guess I'll do this now. This is something you get after defeating a certain boss. I believe half an hour in, 30 minutes in, you unlock this. Again, very similar to Hades, right? I mean, it's literally the exact same system. I believe it's called the burn system or something fire related in Hades. But basically, in simple terms, how this works is you'll toggle on certain conditions. As you'll see, elite enemies have more movement, more area, enemies have more projectiles, yada yada, right? It's all obviously at 0 and based because I've only added this one, right? But if I was to add one, as you can see, it goes up. Basically what that does is it increases the item rarity because you're increasing the difficulty, right? It makes sense. And that's what there really is to it. But what that does, it adds so much more replayability. I mean, it did the same in Hades and it's doing the same here. So I'm glad they ripped it off from Hades, just like most of this game. But if a good system is a good system, I don't really care where it comes from. And then going down, as you can see, there's seasonal stuff that the devs behind this game actually added, which again I think not a lot of others did this, or any that I know of in terms of this genre did this, right? And it's nothing too crazy, but they changed the visuals of it. I think they went a bit above and beyond for Christmas, because for a seasonal sort of very short period of time, they actually created a unique weapon, or some sort of I'll get to the armor later, but some sort of item, a very good item for each of the characters. So I thought that was just cool, and it just helps you think about builds, and gives you that little boost in progression, and I think it's just a great idea. Then going along to the stash, ironically enough, this actually has more stash slots than Diablo 4. I'm not really sure how that happened, but here we are. Don't really have anything in here because most of the things I do sell, because if I'm not wearing them, I'll just sell them. The only things I don't are these unique ones, but yeah, that's about it. And then go into obviously you have a shop, which again is pretty new. Well, it is in Hordes of Torment. It's definitely, it's in Vampire Survivors, but it's a lot more of a basic system, right? Everything you buy is with coins, and it's all very straightforward upgrades, right? For the most part, in terms of more damage or more area, or you can get an extra revive or more coins, stuff like that, right? Very straightforward upgrades. But here it's still upgrades in a way, because all these armors are obviously going to help you out and give you upgrades by proxy, but it's just a lot more interesting to have a constantly rotating shop with, for example, a magical serpent sword of power, right? And it's a mythic, and it gives you the price, and what you can actually do is reserve the items down the bottom. As you can see, I've done that. And so what reserving does is that it will just keep that item, instead of refreshing the shop and you losing the chance to get the magical serpent sword, for example. So it just gives you something to work towards, and just gives you that frequent goal, which helps a lot in just engagement of keeping to play the game, right? If you don't have many goals in a game, then you're probably not going to play anymore. So I think that's just a great idea, and yeah, it's a good idea on their part, really. So again, you can talk to the NPCs, and this campfire is basically where you change your character, but you can also, we covered it a little bit before, is change your perk. So again, this is another thing to differentiate from Vampire Survivors, because Vampire Survivors is just the character, and outside of that you can't really change the core of that character in terms of like a perk based system before going into the game. So it's just a really neat idea. Again, I believe Hades had this, but with weapons and not the character themselves, because obviously there's only one character you can play in Hades. So they did it for the characters this time, and obviously you can see more attack damage, you come invulnerable for 3 seconds, more armor, and they get a bit more interesting as you go along, right? More life regeneration, random skill every 2 levels, all that sort of stuff. So yeah, it's very neat, and as you can see, there are 5 characters in this game, which is obviously a lot less than Vampire Survivors, so I guess that is quite a big downgrade because there are so many characters in Vampire Survivors. But the main real thing with different characters in Vampire Survivors, they're a bit less fleshed out, right? Just in terms of design, they're a little less flashy, and also the differences between, I mean, yeah, they may have more movement speed than another one, more area, more attack speed, all that sort of stuff, and maybe some unique sort of skill, like, oh, you're getting one more revival at this level, or every 5 levels you get increased area, yada yada yada, right? But I just think more fleshed out characters, even though there's less of them, is just a bit more interesting to me, rather than having 30, 40 characters that are largely the same with different, obviously, skills and some minor bonuses. So, to give my final opinion just on this topic of why I actually think Death Must Die is the new king, in a way, of survival horde likes and survival likes in general, and why I think it has now more potential to be a fundamentally better game than Vampire Survivors. And the reason for that is just it took things from not just Vampire Survivors, not just other games in the genre, Hordes of Torment, etc. It's taken from Hades, and it's just done well on each of the mechanics it's added and of the features it's added. So I think this game has a lot of potential, but I covered this briefly when I said this about Halls of Torment, and I still think, what the devs are doing for Halls of Torment is pretty good. But in that video, I did kind of wish that Halls of Torment would have a similar update cadence to Vampire Survivors, and obviously any game ever would wish that as well, because the update frequency and just the amount of updates Vampire Survivors gets is just insane, right? They get updates every week, on co-op, new characters, new stage, new weapon, and there's 7 of them, and it's crazy, right? And that's why, one of the reasons why Vampire Survivors done so incredibly well, because they just keep updating the game. And you need that for a game to keep growing in popularity, or at least maintain some sort of player base. You need updates. So again, I think it's a good sign that even with the limited time Death Must Die has been out, they actually are updating the game with seasonal stuff. Not everybody updates the game with Christmas trees and all these Christmas lights and gives every weapon a unique immortal rarity item that is actually useful, right? It's not this, throwaway weapon that, or maybe it's ice effect and it's not very good and nobody uses it, but it's a seasonal item or whatever. No, they actually make it a good weapon, make it themed to Christmas, and give it to every single character. So I think that's a good sign that they will update the game quite frequently and with meaningful stuff, if that's anything to go off. And that's mainly what it takes for this game to, in my opinion, just every day by day become the best game it can be, and in my opinion a better game than Vampire Survivors. Even though I guess from this video it may seem like I hate Vampire Survivors or whatever, I still put 45-50 hours into Vampire Survivors. I really love that game, and it was my introduction into this genre. So I really, no hate to Vampire Survivors. I just think this game does a lot of things better and just has features that Vampire Survivors simply doesn't have. So yeah, I guess that's the end of the video, and yeah, thank you guys for watching. I'll see you in the next one.